I woke up this morning and saw a headline that I just loved. Politician lashes out at crazy lefty activists and Greta Thunbergs. Well, I couldn't go past that one. Turns out that the South Australian Minister for the Environment and Water, David Speirs, told a Liberal fundraiser that he was kind of reached the point where he was getting fed up with the portfolio because of these crazy lefty activists. David Speirs joins us now. David, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
David, you had me at crazy lefty activists. I was there 100% with you. Now tell us what your frustrations have been, how long you've been in the Environment and Water portfolio, what your frustrations have been, and I guess what you would prefer be doing.
Look, I love this job. I actually asked to be South Australia's Environment Minister back in 2017, 2018, in the lead up to the election. And I have led a very progressive but very practical environmentalism agenda, focused on trees in the ground, expansion of national parks, first place in the nation to ban single-use plastics, and a lot of really worthwhile outcomes-focused projects. Now, what my frustration in this portfolio has been the incessant demands and inability for me to ever please left-wing activists. And that activism, it's very much on the fringe. It's a very small minority. But the poster waving, the virtue signalling, the gestures, the icons, the slogans, the gluing yourself to the road outside a headquarters of a mining entity. That's the sort of thing that I just can't stomach, because South Australia is progressive when it comes to conservation and environmentalism. We're leading the world in so much of this agenda, but we can't please these people. And that's hard to stomach after a while.
David, because I think you hit on a really important point, which is the difference between the kind of concrete actions that you take, as you say. I mean, we can discuss the philosophy of climate change, but you're taking concrete, specific actions that you think the taxpayers want, and you're proud of that. But the problem is, and it strikes me that this is not only your problem, but it is a global problem, that because the philosophy at the extremes of climate change is that the world is going to end in 8 years, 12 years, take your pick, and that people like Prince Charles and others push this idea that the activists feel are kind of almost a religious zealotry that they must act. We had in New South Wales recently a girl shutting down a coal port because she was determined to do the right thing. Isn't the real problem that there's no one really separating the philosophy of extremism from the actual day-to-day idea of climate change?
Well, that's exactly right. And as I mentioned, I have responsibility for a very progressive climate change agenda. First place in the nation to set an interim target of 2030 emissions reductions. We've been committed to that 2050 net zero for ages. And we've got a very adaptation-focused model, greening the streets of Adelaide, cooling this city, creating resilience along our metropolitan beaches and things like that. But the zealots are never happy. I represent suburban Adelaide, the battlers down in the southern suburbs. I'm a boy from the south, originally from Scotland, but for a long time from southern Adelaide. And the people that I represent, they actually just want a government that gets on with it, that keeps a good eye on climate change, shows a bit of leadership, keeps their house in order, but doesn't cost them their jobs and their livelihoods and makes them late for work in the morning by gluing themselves to one of our highways. That's the sort of approach South Australians want, in my view. I think most Australians want that. They do want to see a bit of leadership, but they don't like the extremes. You know, my electorate office has been vandalised, again, by Extinction Rebellion. And I come back to the point, we are doing good things here. We can always do better, absolutely. And I'm happy to be challenged to do better. But it is this inability to please the extreme left. You know, we've got this commitment to net zero by 2050, and within minutes, the lefties are saying we need net zero by 2030. You know, an almost unattainable goal, which would bankrupt the nation.
And I think, David, you've really put your finger on it, and I'm glad someone in your position is speaking up, because regardless of your views on climate change, what you're actually talking about is not going down the path of this insane religious end of the world, we're all doomed, we're all going to die unless we immediately today stop doing this or that. But the activists believe that, so that doesn't matter what people who aren't activists do, it will never be enough. And that's the point you're making. So I'm really glad, David, you're speaking up. We need more leaders speaking up and saying that there isn't this doomsday scenario. We will do what we can, and we will do it sensibly, because that's what most people want. They hate the extremism. What job would you rather do, David?
Well, look, I was, it was almost tongue-in-cheek. I ran to be Deputy Premier last week, and I didn't quite make it to that job. And someone asked me in the audience that night, what would you rather do? And I said, look, I'm not good at getting promotions myself. I need people to go out and suggest jobs for me and maybe have a chat with our Premier on my behalf. I love being the Environment Minister. I'm a young minister. I love being outdoors. I love connecting with all the projects across our state. I love getting into regional South Australia. But you do get worn down by this activism. So, look, I'll do whatever portfolio the Premier of South Australia, Stephen Marshall, wants me to do. I am happy in this portfolio in many ways, but the point that I've been making is that when it comes to this extreme, almost fundamentalism around climate change and climate politics, we actually have to take a moment to step back, understand that we do have our house in order. We're doing some very good things, not just in South Australia. South Australia does push the boundaries in this stuff, but right across the nation. And yes, happy to be challenged to do better, but also it's good to acknowledge when there is a bit of leadership. There are examples of good things in this portfolio. I don't need to be lauded from the rooftops. I don't need a pat on the back. I'm quite comfortable in my own skin and having confidence in what I'm doing. However, my concern is that this becomes a competition, that political parties try to outdo each other. And it's just a race to the bottom in terms of targets and putting barriers in the way of economic growth and the quality of life of South Australians and Australians, because it's actually the poorer people who will suffer most from that approach.
David Speirs, I couldn't have put it better myself. Absolutely 100% agree with you. Keep up the great work. We need more people like you in environment portfolios prepared to speak up against the extremism and the alarmism. David Speirs, thanks so much for coming on Inside the News tonight.
Thank you for having me.